Chapter 3. Joachim grew like no other child. Although he retained his father's body and hair color, something in his mother's genetic contribution must have snapped because he was walking before he was a year old. Before he reached 2, he was conversing with a vocabulary of over 300 words. Thinking that he might have hit the jackpot, the Count began teaching his son music. By the time he was 6, Joachim had mastered the piano, harp, and violin. At 8, his father ventured out with him to play for the courts of aristocrats. Joachim was bored by the music, though, and while in Rome performing for the Pope himself, he brought the bow across his violin and played the flat fifth of the root note for tension. This being outlawed by the church, Count Jenner was all but excommunicated. Upon returning home, the Count flew into a rage and burned all of Joachim's compositions along with the piano and harp. The violin smashed into a million wooden slivers as it hit the road after being thrown out of a third-story window. Trying to stop his father's tirade, Joachim got his right hand broken. His days of music were to be put behind him. Over the next 10 years, Count Jenner did what he could to win back the favor of the church, housing traveling clergymen, donating what time and money he could to holy missions, and holding feasts for Catholic holidays, making sure Joachim was locked away tightly in his room during the celebrations. Joachim, in the meantime, had been allowed to study with some of the greater scholars of the time. The only problem being the contradictions between what he learned from science and what his father pushed on him from the church. He became fascinated by astronomy and made elaborate maps of the stars he could see from his window. Locked in his room, he named these stars and followed their paths through the heavens, a practice that would serve him well later in life. By the time he was 18, his father was back on stable ground with the church, and as a gesture that his son had learned a lesson, he promised to have an elaborate Catholic wedding. He boasted that it would be the celebration of a lifetime. Rumor had it that a cardinal would perform the ceremony, which would be a great honor. Preparations began 2 years in advance, and the Count went into Germany to find his son a bride. 8 months later, he returned with Gloria, the daughter of a German noble. Joachim refused to meet her at first, but when he finally looked at her face, he was stunned by her beauty. She was short but stocky, black hair, and eyes as blue as a summer sky. Her pale white skin and full lips left him breathless. He fell in love with her instantaneously. Shifting his sleeping pattern to accommodate his days spent with Gloria and still be able to chart the night skies, Joachim began to embrace life the way only a man in love can. They would walk through the gardens in the village and wander aimlessly around the countryside, enjoying the conversation as much as the silence. They were inseparable for months and acted as if they were married already. Now, you have to understand what time does to individual moments. It pulls and pulls at the moment until the absurdity of life is evident. Moreover, a single moment could actually distort one's concept of time, causing one to believe that there is no time other than that one moment. When human emotions flare, time takes the back seat and lets fate play the game it will. How many humans feel remorse for a time past? How many humans wish they could travel back in time and change their reaction? Where they laughed, they wish they could have cried. Where they cried, they wish they could rise above the pain and move on through life. Where their tempers reached the critical boiling point, they wish they could go back and talk to themselves, tell the self of the past to relax and to look at life from a larger scale. To have the knowledge of unending time at that one moment so life would be easier and without regret. It is this conception of time that allows us to mold our lives into what it is we subconsciously know the world needs us to be. In light of this, maybe we can understand why the argument between Count Jenner and his son over the attendance of a certain duke, whom Joachim was not fond of, could escalate into a physical fight. Maybe we could also understand why, after being knocked down by his son, the Count was emotionally moved to blame his wife's death on Joachim. We may also be able to understand why Joachim, hurt by this accusation, would run to the only person he believed could bring him solace. Why Gloria and he would take advantage of those loud emotions and turn them into a night of passionate lovemaking that has yet to be matched to this day. Even if we could understand that, we might have trouble understanding Joachim's decision 2 months later to leave his pregnant wife on his father's land and run to a port city in what was known as Portugal. Maybe it had something to do with the premarital affair that would send his father into fits of rage. Maybe it was the fact that the child would be born 6 months before the actual wedding. Whatever the case may be, Joachim packed up his star charts and made tracks for Lisbon.